What if that nagging feeling in the back of your neck was real? What if those hands reaching out from the dark that you believed were there were there? What if the monster in the basement really existed? And what if there was really something under the bed? Would you have the courage to face your fears?
All right, this one's called The Last Stop. Chapter 1, Tuesday morning at Mel's. The coffee was burnt as usual, and Diane Cullerson thought that might be the most normal thing left in the world. She stood behind the counter of Mel's diner, watching the fire rise from her cup like the ghosts of better days. Or watching the steam rise up from her cup like the ghosts of better days. When the biggest worry in Castle Creek, Maine, was whether the high school football team would make it to regionals. That was before the sickness. Before the dead started walking. The bell above the door gave its familiar ding-a-ling, and Diane looked up to see Sheriff Tom Braden shuffle in. The word shuffle stuck in her mind like a splinter. Nobody should shuffle in like the useless thing. Holy shit, sorry, hold on. Nobody should shuffle like that unless they were one of them. But Tom's eyes were clear. Tired but clear. And when he spoke, his voice carried the same gravelly authority it always had. Coffee, Diane. Black as my mood and twice as bitter. She poured without asking. Tom had been coming in every morning for 15 years, ever since his wife Martha passed away from cancer. Always black coffee, always the same booth by the window where he could watch Main Street like a hawk watching for field mice. Any word from Augusta? She asked, setting the cup down, her hand trembling slightly. At 62, Diane had lived through enough small-town crises to know when something was different. And this was different. Tom shook his head. Radio's been dead since yesterday. Last thing we heard was the emergency broadcast telling folks to stay indoors, avoid contact with... He trailed off, staring into his coffee like it might hold answers. With the infected, Diane finished. The word tasted like copper pennies in her mouth. Through the window, Main Street looked like a mouth with half its teeth kicked out. Murphy's Hardware, closed. Metal grating pulled down. The recall pharmacy. Windows boarded up with sheets of plywood that someone had spray painted "Stay Out" across in red letters that looked suspiciously like dried blood. Even the old Baptist church had its doors chained shut, though Diane could see Reverend Mill's ancient Buick still parked behind it. Tom? She said quietly. What exactly are we dealing with here? The sheriff took a long sip of coffee, grimaced at the taste, and met her eyes. In them, she saw something she'd never seen before in Tom Braden's steady gaze. Fear. Hell if I know, Diane. Started down in Portland 3 days ago. Some kind of virus, they said. Made people sick. Real sick. Fever, convulsions, the whole 9 yards. And they died. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Then they got back up. Diane felt the coffee cup slip from her fingers. It hit the linoleum floor like a crash that seemed to echo into empty diner like a gunshot. Brown liquid spread across the black and white checkerboard pattern, and she thought absurdly of blood pooling on a chessboard. It's impossible, she whispered. Yeah, well, tell that to Jimmy Torino. Found him yesterday morning in his apartment above the barber shop. Been dead for at least a day, maybe 2. Stiff as a board, skin gone all gray and mottled. But when I rolled him over to check for ID, his eyes snapped open and he tried to bite one out of my arm. Diane's knees went weak. She gripped the counter for support. Jesus, Tom, what do we do? What do you think I do? Or what do you think I did? I ran like hell. Tom's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. But not before I saw him sit up and start looking around for something to eat. And I don't think he was interested in Mel's Tuesday meatloaf special. The silence stretched between them like a wire ready to snap. Outside, a dog barked once and then went quiet. Too quiet. How many? Diane asked. In town? Maybe a dozen, far as I can tell. But if what they're saying on the radio is true, if this thing spreads like they think it does... Tom stood up and walked to the window, pressing his palm against the glass. Diane, I think we might be looking at the end of everything. Chapter 2. The Sound of Silence. They came an hour later. Diane was in the kitchen, methodically wiping down surfaces that were already clean, when she heard Tom's sharp intake of breath from the dining room. Diane, get over here, now! Something in her voice made her drop the dish rag and move fast. Tom stood, frozen at the window, his coffee cup forgotten in his hand. She followed his gaze and felt her blood turn into ice water in her veins. They were coming up Main Street in a ragged line, maybe 8 or 9 of them. At first, they might have been ordinary people. Diane even recognized a few faces. There was Mrs. Henderson from the post office, still wearing her blue uniform shirt. Behind her, the Keller boy who'd graduated from high school last spring and worked part-time at the gas station. Oh, that's very nice of you, man. I appreciate that. But something was wrong with the way they moved. Their gait was unsteady, lurching, like marionettes with half their strings cut. And their skin. Jesus. Their skin was the color of old newspaper, mottled with dark patches that looked like bruises or worse. Mrs. Henderson's head lolled to one side at an angle that would have meant... Holy shit, I'm so sorry. Mrs. Henderson's head lolled to one side at an angle that would have meant a broken neck for any living person. A thin stream of dark fluid ran from the corner of the mouth down to her collar. Her eyes, once kind and crinkled with smile lines, now stared ahead with the glassy emptiness of a doll's eyes. Oh, God, Diane breathed. Oh, sweet Jesus. The group moved with a terrible kind of purpose, though they seemed to be following no particular path. They reminded Diane of salmon swimming upstream, driven by some instinct they couldn't name or resist. One of them, she thought it might be old Pete Hendricks, who used to run the tackle shop, suddenly stopped and turned back toward the diner. His nose lifted slightly, as if he were sniffing the air. Can they smell us? Diane whispered. Tom was already backing away from the window, his hand moving instinctively to the service weapon on his hip. I don't know, but I don't want to find out. Pete Hendricks took a shambling step toward the diner, then another. The others began to follow, drawn by some invisible thread. Back door, Tom said urgently. Now! But as they turned toward the kitchen, they heard it, a slow, rhythmic thudding against the front door. Thump, 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 like someone knocking, but with no intelligence behind it, no expectation of an answer, just the mechanical persistence of a broken machine trying to complete its program. The sound was joined by another, and another. Through the kitchen window, Diane could see more shapes moving in the alley behind the diner. They were surrounded. The basement, she said. Mel always kept supplies down there in case of blizzards. There's another way out through the old coal cellar. Tom nodded grimly. They moved toward the narrow stairs behind the prep counter. But the sounds from the outside were getting louder, more insistent. The front windows shuddered in their frames as bodies pressed against the glass. They know we're here, Tom said. Somehow, they know. Chapter 3. Underground. The basement of Mel's diner smelled like 50 years of accumulated mustiness, old grease, and something else. Something that reminded Diane unpleasantly of the funeral home where they'd held services for her husband 5 years ago. The single bare bulb cast harsh shadows across stacks of canned goods, boxes of napkins, and paper cups in an old chest freezer that hummed like a dying insect. Above them, the sounds continued. Not just knocking now, but scratching. The awful sounds of fingernails, or what was left of fingernails, dragging against wood and glass. How long before they break through? Diane asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Tom was examining the coal cellar door, an old wooden thing that looked like it hadn't been opened since the Eisenhower administration. Hard to say. Those windows are pretty sturdy, and the front door is solid oak. But if there isn't enough of them. He didn't need to finish. They both knew even the strongest door would give away eventually under enough mindless, relentless pressure. The scratching sounds were getting more intense. Diane heard something that might have been glass cracking. Tom, we need to go, now. He yanked on the cellar door handle. It didn't budge. Rusted shut, he muttered, then threw his shoulder against it. The impact echoed through the basement like a gunshot, and for a moment, the scratching sounds above seemed to intensify in response. Here, Diane said, grabbing a crowbar from Mel's toolkit. Let me help. They worked together, prying at the door frame. The wood was old and soft with rot, and after several agonizing minutes, it finally gave way with a shriek of protesting hinges. Beyond the door lay a narrow tunnel that sloped upward into darkness. The air that was wafted out was cold and stale, carrying the musty smell of earth and decay. Where does it come out? Tom asked, peering into the gloom. Behind the Methodist church, I think. Maybe 2 blocks from here. Diane grabbed a flashlight from Mel's emergency kits. It's how they used to deliver coal back in the day. Mel told me about it once. A crash from upstairs made them both jump. Then another. The sound of glass finally giving way. They're in, Tom said. From above came a new sound. Footsteps. Slow, shuffling, but definitely footsteps. And underneath that, a low moaning that seemed to come from multiple throats, harmonizing in a chord that spoke of endless hunger and need. Go, Tom said, pushing her toward the tunnel. I'm right behind you. Diane crawled into the narrow space, the flashlight beam dancing ahead of her. The tunnel was barely wide enough for one person, and she had to move on hands and knees across what felt like decades of accumulated dirt and debris. Behind her, she could hear Tom's heavy breathing and the scrape of his boots against the tunnel walls. They had crawled maybe 50 yards when they heard it, a new sound from the diner basement, the creak of old wooden stairs under weight they weren't designed to bear. They found the stairs, Tom said, his voice tight with controlled panic. Diane forced herself to move faster, ignoring the sharp stones that bit into her palms and knees. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, a claustrophobic nightmare of earth and shadow. The flashlight beam wavered as her hands shook, casting dancing shadows on the dirt walls that looked like reaching fingers. Behind them, the sounds grew closer. Chapter 4. The Surface. They emerged from the coal cellar on the gray afternoon light behind the Methodist church like survivors climbing out of a bomb shelter. Diane's clothes were filthy, her hands scraped and bleeding, but she had never been so grateful to see the sky. Tom pulled the cellar door shut behind them and looked around for something to barricade it with. There was an old wheelbarrow nearby, rusted but still heavy. Together, they dragged it over the door. I won't hold for long, Tom said, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool autumn air. How long do we have? Minutes, maybe less. They were in the church's back garden, surrounded by carefully tended flower beds that were now brown and withered with the first frost. The church itself loomed above them, its white steeple pointed toward heaven like an accusing finger. The building looked normal enough, but there were no cars in the parking lot, no signs of life. Where is everybody? Diane asked. Reverend Mills, the congregation, the people who should be helping us. Tom's expression was grim. Dead, fled, or turned. Take your pick. They could hear sounds from the tunnel now, distant but getting closer. A rhythmic scraping that spoke of bodies dragging themselves the narrow space with a single-minded determination. We need wheels, Tom said. My patrol car is back at the diner, which does us no good. What about that? He pointed to an old pickup truck parked behind the church's fellowship hall. That's Reverend Mills' truck. He's had it for 20 years. Think you'll mind if we borrow it? A crash from the direction of the coal cellar answered that question. The wheelbarrow had been pushed aside, and the shapes were beginning to emerge from the ground like corpses rising from their graves. Tom ran for the truck. Diane closed behind. The driver's door was unlocked. Small town trust had now seemed like a relic from another world. Tom slid behind the wheel and it felt around for keys. Not here, he said. Check the visor. Nothing. Diane looked frantically around the cab while Tom examined the steering column. Can you hotwire it? Lady, I'm a small town sheriff, not a car thief. I wouldn't know where to. Wait. His finger found something taped under the dashboard. Spare key. God bless paranoid ministers. The engine turned over on the third try, coughing to life with a sound like an old man clearing his throat. Tom threw it into reverse, just as the first of their pursuers reached the truck. It was Mrs. Henderson from the post office. Up close, Diane could see that half her face was missing, revealing yellow teeth in the dark hollow of her mouth. Her remaining eye focused on Diane with something that might have been recognition. Mrs. Henderson slammed her fist against the passenger window. Mrs. Henderson slammed her fist against the passenger window. The glass spider web but held. Tom gunned it backwards, knocking Mrs. Henderson aside. She rolled once and came up again, seemingly unaffected by what should have been a bone-breaking impact. Where do we go? Diane looked at Tom, spun the wheel, and headed for the street. Anywhere but here, Tom replied. But even as he said it, they both said the truth. There was nowhere to go. Main Street was full of them now. Dozens of shambling figures moving with that same terrible purpose. Some wore the clothes they died in. Pajamas, work uniforms, Sunday dresses. Others were worse. Their garments torn and stained with substances Diane didn't want to identify. The truck's radio crackled to life, startling them both. Anyone out there? This is Portland Emergency. If anyone can hear this. Tom grabbed the headset. This is Sheriff Braden, Castle Creek. We're alive. What's your status? Static then. Sheriff! Thank God! Thought we were. Portland's gone, sir. The whole city. Augusta, too. From what we can tell, this thing, it's spreading faster than we can track it. How many survivors do you have? Tom looked at Diane. She saw her own despair reflected in his eyes. 2, he said into the radio. Just 2. Chapter 5. The Long Road. They drove north on Route 1, past familiar landmarks that now seemed like monuments to a dead world. The Dairy Queen where Diane used to take her grandchildren for ice cream. Windows smashed. Parking lot littered with overturned cars and things that didn't want to look at too closely. The antique shops and craft stores that brought tourists through in the summer. Dark and lifeless. Their hand-painted signs looked like tombstones in the fading light. The radio had gone quiet again after that brief contact. Tom kept trying to raise someone, anyone, but got nothing but static and the occasional burst of what sounded like screaming before the signal cut out. Where are we going? Diane asked. She had been asking for the same question for the past hour, and Tom kept giving her the same answer. Away from here. But away to where? If Portland was gone, if Augusta was gone, then what was left? I've got a cabin up near Rangeley, Tom said finally. It's isolated, off the grid. My grandfather built it back in the 30s. If we can make it there, we might be able to wait this out. Wait what out, Tom? What if this isn't something that passes? What if this just is how things are now? Tom was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the empty road ahead. They hadn't seen another living person for 30 miles, but they had seen the others. Clusters of them wandering through small towns and roadside settlements like lost tourists in hell. Then I guess we learn to live with it, he said finally. Or we don't live at all. The cop's fuel gauge was getting low. They would need to stop soon. but every gas station they passed was either destroyed or crawling with the infected. Diane found herself studying the faces of the dead as they drove past, looking for people she knew. She had seen the Torino boy from the hardware store and thought she recognized the woman who used to run the library before she retired. How many others were there? How many people from Castle Creek that were shambling around with dead eyes and an endless hunger? There, Tom said, pointing ahead. That mobile station looks clear. It did not look clear. But then again, it did look clear. But then again, so had the diner until the infected had shown up. Tom pulled up to the pumps carefully, keeping the engine running. I'll pump, you watch, he said. Anything moves that isn't supposed to, you honk the horn. Diane slid over the driver's seat and gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles. The station was too quiet. The kind of quiet that make your skin crawl. No birds singing, no insects buzzing, no distant sound of traffic. Just the mechanical whine of the gas pump and Tom's breathing. Hold on, my son just got hurt. 1 sec. Okay, where was I? 1 sec, I need a drink of water. Little guy fell up the stairs on accident. Alright, the pump handle clicked off automatically when the tank was full. Tom was replacing the nozzle when Diane saw a movement in the station's convenience store. A figure pressed against the glass door, and for a moment her heart leaped with hope. Another survivor! But then she saw the way it moved, the familiar lurching gait, and her hope died. Tom, she called softly. Company. The thing in the store was pressing harder against the glass, and now Diane could see more movement behind it. The door was locked, but the glass was starting to bow outward under the pressure. Tom got back in the truck just as the convenience store window exploded outward in a shower of glass and aluminum. 3 of them came through the opening, moving with that terrible single-minded purpose. One of them had been a child once, a little girl in a pink dress that was now stained with dark patches. Her blonde hair hung in matted strings across her face, but Diane could see her eyes, dead in the child's face, the worst thing imaginable. Tom floored the gas pedal, and they peeled out the station in a cloud of gravel and exhaust. In the rearview mirror, Diane watched the 3 figures pursue them for a few shambling steps before stopping, as if they had forgotten what they were chasing. Jesus, Tom muttered. Did you see that little girl? Diane nodded, unable to speak. She thought of her own granddaughter, safe in California with her parents. At least, she hoped she was safe. Who knew how far this thing had spread? The sun was setting now, painting the sky the color of dried blood. Soon it would be dark, and Diane had a feeling that darkness would bring new horrors. The dead didn't need light to hunt. How much farther? She asked. 20 miles, maybe 25. Tom's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. We'll make it. We have to. Epilogue. The cabin. They reached the cabin just as the last light was fading from the western sky. It sat in a small clearing beside a dark lake, surrounded by tall pines that whispered secrets in the evening breeze. It looked like something from a postcard, a perfect refuge from the world's madness. But as Tom killed the engine and they sat in the sudden silence, Diane couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't safe. Not really. Maybe nowhere was safe anymore. It's not over, is it? She said quietly. As Tom stared at the dark water of the lake, somewhere in the distance, an owl called, a sound so normal it seemed almost obscene in their new world they found themselves in. "No," he said finally. "I don't think it is. I think maybe it's just the beginning." They got out of the truck and walked toward the cabin. Two survivors in a world that no longer had room for the living. Behind them, the road stretched away into darkness, leading back to a town full of the walking dead and a future that held nothing but questions. In the forest around them, things moved that shouldn't move. Things that had once been people, once been neighbors and friends and lovers, now reduced to walking hunger and endless need. The dead had inherited the earth, and the living had become the endangered species. But they were still alive, still breathing, still hoping. And sometimes, Diane thought as Tom unlocked the cabin door and they stepped into the relative safety of four walls and a roof. Sometimes, that was enough. For now. The end. All right, well, I hope you guys enjoyed both of those stories. Me and the kids are probably going to head over to the playground. Want to go to the playground? Yeah, we're going to head down to the playground now. And, yeah. You want to say bye?
Bye.
All right, Lou Hammer, what were you saying? We're recovered from a crazy person. Let's stay with us. Oh my God, dude. I hope you guys are okay. Holy crap.
I see you. Picture.
Thanks for that, BVD. I appreciate you guys sitting through the stories and enjoying them. And I'll catch you guys next time. And remember to always face your fears. Bye.
Bye.